The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second of our three webinar in the Michigan Student Success Network virtual meeting. I'm Jenny Shanker from the Center for Student Success. I am joined by Peter Adams, who is going to be talking about non-cognitive issues in a co-rec classroom. If you were with us for the last presentation, we had a great chat with Alexandra Logue from CUNY about their work, the random controlled experiment that they did with their co-requisite math. Now we're going to be talking more about what happens in a co-requisite classroom and how that can benefit students. If you weren't on the previous webinar, I just want to review quickly that there's a question pane where you may type your questions. I will be monitoring those questions, and I will break in to ask Peter questions, or he can feel free to pause for questions, and I can look for them as they come up. And then if we have more time at the end of the webinar, we may have time to unmute some of you and have you ask questions, so we have a little bit more back and forth since we have not a huge number of people on the line. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to Peter Adams, a man who needs very little introduction in Michigan, the Professor Emeritus from the Community College of Baltimore County. Thank you, Peter.
Hello, everybody in Michigan. Before we came on the air, John Hetz, who's in California, and I were talking about riding around with our convertible tops down in the last week or so. So the spring is on the way. Hang in there. I would also like to congratulate all of you in Michigan. In the first webinar an hour ago, Jenny presented some data that was really impressive. I just wrote down one particular statistic. She reported that as of her latest survey of the Michigan community colleges in 2019, 10 community colleges not only have piloted ALP, but have actually scaled it up. And I think Jenny's definition of scaling up is at least 75% of the developmental students are in ALP sections, and that's really wonderful. I'm always bragging about Michigan because you're a state where nobody has ordered anyone to do this, that schools are doing it because they're convinced it will be more beneficial for their students, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I would wish more states would follow Michigan's example, and then we wouldn't have to put up with the top-down mandates that are beginning to be quite common across the country now that California and Texas have joined the groups with state legislatures mandating. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I sure think it would be better if we faculty would just decide we're convinced that co-requisite models work, and we would adopt them without being ordered to by somebody who has never been in a developmental classroom. Enough of those politics. Let's get on and talk about non-cognitive issues. So what I wanted to do was start with a little bit of data from way back in 1993. And this is a study we did at the Community College of Baltimore County that was really the birth event for ALP. In 88, 89, we had acquired our very first computer, an Apple IIe, and we started a database, and we put every student's placement information, and at the end of every semester, we put every student's grades in every English class that they took. And we did that for 4 years. So there were 863 students who took English 099, our upper level developmental writing course. And that was the group we wanted to study. And what we found was that 57% of them passed, not necessarily on the first try, but within 4 years, 57% had passed the developmental course. And 41% then took English 101. So that means that 16% of the original cohort, 135 students, never failed anything. They passed the developmental course and then gave up. They never went on to even register and attempt English 101. And that was kind of an eye-opener for us. We started, there was a group of about 6 of us that were really closely involved in this study. And we started thinking about the group over to the left of the red box, the ones that we have listed as failed 099. And we decided that that group, we shouldn't say they failed the course. We want to say they never passed it, because all 6 of us who were working on this taught the course regularly, and we knew that most students didn't really fail the course, they just gave up. That I used to say, if I still had half of my class coming to class by Thanksgiving, I was having a really good semester. So those 2 boxes began to show to us what our problem was. It wasn't a problem with students not being able to do the work. It was a problem of students dropping out, of students giving up. But we want to follow the data anyhow, one more level. Let's see how they did in English 101. And you can see in the box, in the red box now, that of the original cohort, only 33% within 4 years had passed English 101. That means 2/3 of the students who were placed in the upper level developmental writing class never passed the course for which they were being developed. That was the birth of ALP. We didn't know that's what it was the birth of back in 1993, but that's what started us trying to figure out a better way to do developmental education. And we began with the question, why do students drop out? And so we started asking ourselves that, a bunch of English teachers sitting around my dining room table most of the time, drinking too much coffee, and brainstorming. And these are the kinds of things we thought were problems for students. We then decided to organize a focus group. We got a bunch of students who agreed to meet with us. I think we had to spring for some pizza to bribe the students to come to the focus group. And we asked them the question, if you had, this was early in September, if you had to drop out of school before the semester was over, what would be the kinds of reasons that might cause you to have to do that? And the kinds of things the focus group told us were, first of all, they said, well, none of those things you listed. They said it's much more things like this. And as we began to listen to them, we decided, we kind of grouped this bunch of problems under the umbrella of life issues, that things in their lives, challenges in their lives, would make it impossible for them to continue in college. But they went on, that's not all they told us. Not as often, and not as many of them, but a significant number gave us a second kind of issue that might cause them to drop out of school. Issues like this, students fearing they aren't college material. I want to pause on that one for a moment, because it's the comment that most depressed me when I heard it from my students, and I heard it a lot. Oh, Professor Adams, I'm just not sure I'm really college material. And I really wonder who told them there was such a thing as college material? Who put that idea in their head? And whoever did, when they arrived on our campus in those days, we gave them the nasty AccuPlacer. And then we said to them, well, we're not sure you're college material either. And you're going to have to take these non-credit courses and prove to us that you're college material before we'll let you take college English. So we just reinforced that insecurity. That's what our old model, the prerequisite model, did. And I think that was one of the major weaknesses in it. Other kinds of things, students don't know how the college works. They don't know anyone at the college. They lose confidence. They don't feel connected to the college. They don't feel they belong. The stress becomes too great. So all of the first group of things they told us were life issues. These we call affective issues. They're more like issues going on in their psyches, going on in their minds. And so we then did a series of fairly large surveys of students. One semester, I think it was maybe in 1994, we actually sent out a survey with all of these items that the focus group gave us on the survey, and asked every student placed in the upper level developmental writing course which of those might be a factor if they had to drop out of school. And so our data came from that, and it just reinforced what the focus groups had told us. So we ended up with this sort of an understanding of why students might not be succeeding in our developmental program. Those affective issues, those things going on in their psyches, plus those life issues. And then there were a few other things mentioned in there. And also those of us who teach developmental courses have noticed this about our students, that they sometimes just don't seem to have college knowledge. If they're first generation to go to school, there's nobody at home in their family to explain to them what a bursar is, or what office hours are for, or what this document they received called a syllabus is all about. And so we added college knowledge to the three big areas we thought our students, we call those all non-cognitive issues. So non-cognitive issues is the umbrella for those three kinds of issues. We're going to talk about them in that order. So let's start with affective issues. The affective issues, well, all of these non-cognitive issues, let me start a little more broadly. All of these non-cognitive issues are the major reasons students don't succeed. Much more frequently, these are the reasons, rather than any difficulties they have in my courses with writing or in math courses with polynomials, that it's things going on in their lives or in their heads, or their unfamiliarity with college terminology and how college works. The second thing we came to realize, this group of us who were working on this back in the late 90s, was that most faculty have absolutely no preparation for addressing non-cognitive issues. But we also agreed, at least among the 6 of us that were working on this project, that doesn't mean the faculty can't help, even though it would be nice if we had had some graduate preparation in how to address these issues. The fact that we didn't, we couldn't use as an excuse for not at least trying, being aware that these are major issues and that trying to figure out ways that we might address them. And I want to hasten to add that, of course, faculty in ALP classes, faculty in co-rec classes, are not the only people on campus with a responsibility for addressing these non-cognitive issues. Lots of other people, of course, advisors also have that responsibility, and so do people in financial aid. And when you stop and think about it, everybody on campus, all the faculty and all the staff, should, whenever possible, be able to help students wrestle with these kinds of issues that threaten their ability to stay in college. But nevertheless, in ALP sections, one of the things that we have going for us is the very small class size. At our school, the support class, the co-rec class, is capped at 10 students. And so we have the luxury of getting to know our students much more completely as full, well-rounded human beings with all the strengths and weaknesses that human beings come with. And so we have a special opportunity, and I think a special responsibility, to pay more attention to the non-cognitive issues. Okay, Jenny, I'm now having the problem. I'm just gonna stop showing and start showing again. That doesn't fix it. I'm going to escape out of here and then I did this once while you were introducing me, and it fixed I'm having the same problem Alexa had.
Okay, I'll bring up your slides just in case.
Yeah, you better get ready.
Okay.
Okay, I think I got it.
All right.
One of the things that we decided we needed to do, we're now going to address those affective issues. That was the category of things going on in our students' psyches. The one that bothers me the most is students fearing that they're not college material. And we're going to try to find ways to help them believe they are college material instead of reinforcing that belief the way we used to under the prerequisite model. So one of the things that helps is that students they're in a college course. They're registered for English 101. And so we're no longer saying you're not ready for college level work. We're saying we're going to put you in a college level course, and we not only will put you there, we're not just going to put you there and let you sink or swim. We're going to provide support if you need it to be successful in that course. And so I think that the model itself, without the faculty, without us instructors doing anything, the model itself begins to address that college material issue. I think at my school, we're very committed to the idea of backward curriculum design. I hope in the enlightened developmental programs in Michigan, no one is still doing this, but in our program back in the 90s when we were developing ALP, most of our developmental classes, what students did when they came to class in September in a developmental writing class was review the 8 parts of speech or work on identifying topic sentences in paragraphs, the same kind of stuff they had done in high school, if not back in the 7th or 8th grade. So in ALP,
Peter, we're not on our screens. We are not seeing any text on your slide.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that fun?
Are you now?
Here we go. Now I see something. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
There are 2 different places I have to keep my eye on. Thanks for warning me.
I know it's really tough to multitask with this technology stuff. I understand. Yes. Yeah. All right.
Well, I had time while Lexa was struggling with it to watch her struggle and to try to practice on my own. And so I didn't, by the time John Hetz does his presentation, he's going to have it down pat.
Hopefully so. I mean, as long as the technology continues to be our friend, which I think is probably more of the issue than that the operator errors. So go on. Sorry.
All right. So backwards curriculum design means that in our developmental correct support course, we don't do that stuff that we were doing in the traditional prerequisite developmental writing class. What we do is pretty much the same thing we're doing in English 101, only we're doing it more slowly, with more scaffolding, with more reinforcement and more practice, more chances for students to get individual attention. So what they're doing in the correct section doesn't feel like 6th grade. It feels like they're in college, working on reading college level essays, reading college level books, and writing college level essays. Now, did number 3 come up on your screen, Jenny?
Yes. Yes, it did.
Okay. Just wanted to check.
Yep.
Finally, this is a big deal, but we actually we had a logistical problem back in around 2008 and 2009 during the recession when our enrollments went way up. There weren't enough classrooms on campus, and people kept saying, we can't afford a classroom that will hold 30 students for a little ALP section with just 10. And so we were getting pushed to having our classes meet at 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And to fight that, we went around and found a bunch of little conference rooms that were underutilized on campus. And we took them over and made them into ALP co-rec section classrooms. They would have a conference table in the middle, and the students and the instructor would sit around the conference table, and we took to calling them seminar rooms. And I don't know how big of a deal that was. I think points 1 and 2 were much bigger deals, but we tried to make the room feel like the kinds of rooms they had seen in movies about what it's like to go to college, that they were actually in a seminar room. All right. We wanted to try to find ways to help the students feel more attached to the college. And again, the very design of ALP, the fact that they're in a class that's so small means they're going to get to know 9 other students and an instructor much better than they will in a traditional class of 20 or 30 students. And the fact that they see each other 6 hours a week rather than just 3 hours a week helps that. Furthermore, the faculty classroom design, the instructional design, is intended to encourage students to get to know each other. Small class size promotes that, but we also do lots of group work, lots of active learning where students break up into little groups of 3 and 4 so that they really get to know each other and get used to working each other. And in many cases, Lexa mentioned this also, they form study groups that meet regularly 1 night a week or Saturday afternoons or Sunday afternoons so they can study while they're watching the Baltimore Ravens play football at the same time. No, that was sort of a joke. I can't tell if anyone was laughing or not because I can't hear any of you. All right, so we wanted them to feel more attachment to the college. we've known for years that persistence is important, but a smart guy named David Yeager down at the University of Texas wrote some articles and gave some talks in which he convinced us that it wasn't just persistence, it was productive persistence. The example I always give of this is if you had a student who was trying to get on the other side of a stone wall, and the student backed up and took a run at that wall as hard as he could and crashed into it and maybe gashed a big bloody gash in his forehead, but he didn't get over the wall, he might back up if he was persistent and take another run at that wall. That would be persistence and dangerous, but it wouldn't be productive. Productive persistence would be to walk down the wall a ways and find there's a gate 100 yards down to the right and go through the gate through the wall. So we want students not to just persist, but to persist in smart ways that are productive rather than just continuing to do the same thing that isn't working over and over. So a couple of examples of that. Well, let me say right here a couple of things. All the examples I'm going to give in this webinar, a few of these are things I actually developed, but most of them are things, as many of you know, I spent a lot of time working with schools in Michigan, but also all over the rest of the country. And when I do, people often share their ideas about non-cognitive issues, and I just steal them like crazy. So I would guess 3/4 of what I'm going to talk to you about are ideas that they're not my ideas. Some of these I've been retired now for 4 years. I haven't even had a chance to try out, but they sounded so good, I include them in my presentations anyhow. So I want to thank especially any of you in Michigan who see one of the things you said to me at one of the workshops I did in Michigan showing up in my PowerPoint. Thank you very much for that. So here we go. Here's an idea. As readers, students often are reading text in college, and in ALP sections, we don't, even though some students in the class have been evaluated by some kind of a objective test that John Hetz will be talking about in the next hour after this, they've been diagnosed as reading at the 8th grade level or the 4th grade level. Nevertheless, we don't ever pick readings at the 4th grade level or the 8th grade level. We pick readings at the college level, and then we provide the kind of support that will help them figure out how to read those kinds of challenging readings. As Katie Hearn is famous for saying, high challenge and high support. So we get students in groups and ask each group to make a list of strategies for when they're reading and they come to a word they don't know. What should they do? What should they do? And then we ask the groups to report out, or sometimes we'll have them put their answers on newsprint and we'll walk around the room and look at them. And the thing that comes up most often, because they're trying to tell the instructor what they think the instructor wants to hear, the thing that comes up most often is, oh, I looked a word up in a dictionary. And actually, what we want to suggest to students, and I thought I might have a second slide on this, but I don't. What we want to suggest to students is there's lots of other things to do when you bump into a difficult word, and that looking it up in the dictionary should probably be the thing you do least often, because if you stop and look up every word you don't know in a dictionary, that's kind of persistence, but not very productive. When you get to the end of whatever it is you're reading, you probably won't remember or even maybe understand what you read because you spent so much time reading the dictionary. So we suggest, for example, various word attack skills like breaking the word into syllables, like deciding, is it really important that I know what this word means? The example I use always is that a woman was described in a book we were reading one year as wearing a cerise sweater. Do you need to know what color cerise is? And probably not. And so just skipping over the word and saying, I don't think, or reading on, because very often, especially when writers use technical language, they'll explain the technical term right in the next sentence, and so forth. So we give them a bunch of strategies that will make it so they don't so often interrupt their reading and go to a dictionary. All right. Another thing about we try to suggest about productive persistence is an incentive system. Our students' lives are very stressful. They have lots of demands on their time and attention, and lots of things that they do. They will be penalized if they don't do it. If they don't show up at work, they won't get paid. If they don't, in most courses they're taking, if they don't do the homework, it'll affect their grade. And so most of us in ALP have developed a point system where we actually give out points for everything. And just showing up in class is worth 5 points. If you're late, it's only worth 3. We do a lot of group work, and successful participation in a group might get you 10 points. We do a lot of little short writing assignments. They might be worth 20 points. The major essays are worth a couple of hundred. And so the students are constantly getting points, and they can look in actually in our learning management system and see how many points. They have to get at least 70% of the possible points to pass the course, and they can always see of how many have been available up till that point in the semester and how many they've accumulated. That's the sort of CPA version of encouraging productive persistence. The sort of touchy-feely version that some of my colleagues use, they make promises like, if everyone has a first draft of their essay number 2 and brings it to class on Friday, I'll bake cookies for class on Monday. And so I think both of those are, but what we're trying to do is figure out ways that we can make it that students will feel incentivized to actually do the work for our courses, come to class in our courses, and join in the group work and the discussions in our courses. This is a kind of controversial approach to productive persistence. I ask students to write a short essay in which they explain why it is at this point in their life they're in a developmental writing class. And here's the kinds of things that they tell me in those essays. And I actually pull out these statements from the essays and put them up on a screen or on a blackboard or something so they can all see them. And I ask them, this is the next class period, what do you notice about what you told me about why you're in this developmental writing class? And pretty soon somebody will say, well, every sentence starts with the pronoun I. And I say, yeah. And the message I got was that as a group, you all were telling me it's your fault. You did something wrong. You rushed through the test, or you didn't work very hard in high school, or you were tired, or you left after half an hour and didn't complete the acuplacer, or something, that it was your fault. And I said, so that's the message I got from the papers you wrote for me. Now I want to show you some data. And I show them this chart. When I do it in class, I think it's always a good idea to try to get them to be better at reading graphic data like this. But for you guys, I'll just make it quicker and say across the bottom is family income, people who come from a family that made over $100,000 on the right, less than 18,000 in the leftmost column, and the vertical axis is the percentage of students from those families that are placed in developmental education. This is both math and English, either math or English, according to Bettinger and Long. And you can see it's almost a straight line graph. The less income your family had, the more likely it is that you were placed in developmental education. And I ask my students, why would that be true? Why would it be true that students who come from richer families would be less likely to be placed into developmental education? And I asked them to think about their experiences, whether they were from a middle income family or lower income family. Think about their experiences and tell me what kinds of things do they remember from their experiences in K through 12 that might account for this situation. And they tell me things like this. They complain about their high schools. They say they were sick. Their parents were not very well educated. One of my students, whom I still remember, reported living in 6 foster homes while she was in K through 12. The class size in their high schools. My parents and my friends all used terrible grammar. We were homeless. It was hard to study, and so forth. So then I put the reasons they gave when they wrote their papers about why they're in developmental ed on the left column, and the reasons that they gave why the data are true in the right column. And I asked, are all of these reasons true? And everybody agrees that the things they said in their papers were true, but it's also true that their high schools were generally terrible. It's also true that many of them were never asked to write an essay when they were in high school, and so forth. And then I asked, what's the key question in this little activity? I asked them, well, of these two columns, these two sets of reasons why you might be in developmental education today, which ones do you have any control over? And of course, it's the ones in red. And so I want to use this to talk about, I want them to be aware that in many of their lives, there were things in their backgrounds, in their K through 12 experience that made it more likely, but that if they want to avoid being victimized by those socioeconomic factors, then the only thing they have any control over is the things in the left-hand column. And that's how I finally get around to productive persistence, that when they say I didn't work very hard in high school, they're going to have to work harder and so forth. So a lot of my colleagues don't like that. I love it. I love that exercise. I want to make sure my students are aware of those socioeconomic factors, but I also want them to know that they can do things that will make it less likely that they're a victim of those factors. So.
Can this is Jenny. I want to break in with a question.
Yeah.
Have you ever had any, I know you have some instructors, you say some instructors are not comfortable doing this. How do you deal with a situation in a classroom if a student is uncomfortable with seeing that data or with feeling, I'm assuming that instructors worry that students will feel like you are victimizing them or that you are stereotyping them, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions.
That's Jenny. Was that your question or was that somebody in the group?
That was my question.
Yeah. Well, it's the same question my colleagues have.
Yeah.
They worry that this will be too much of a downer for students. That it would be better if students aren't aware of those socioeconomic factors. My experience is that 90% of my students are well aware of them already, that I'm not telling them something they aren't already aware of. I'm maybe just reminding them of it. And I think the danger that my colleagues and that your question imply is a real danger. And I watch for that reaction. And I try to say, but we're not hopeless. We're not helpless in the face of these factors, and if you know about them, it will encourage you to do the kinds of things that will avoid being a victim of those and I think not being aware of them is more of a danger, although I recognize that there are dangers on both sides. But that's why I continue to use, and I guess about half my colleagues use that exercise, but certainly lots of them don't. All right. One of the things that Rebecca Cox in the College Fear Factor, and of course the wonderful work on fixed mindset and growth mindset. Both of those writers have talked about is how do students deal with setbacks? How do they sometimes even more honest, more forcefully say, how do they deal with failure? So one of the things that I do is to address this issue is every time that I return a set of papers to students with my comments, perhaps my grades on them, I ask them to write a short paper, and we do a lot of this short writing in the writing class, this sort of informal, low-stakes writing. I ask them to explain what they learned from the last paper they wrote, including my comments on the paper. And what I'm doing that because I really want to I make everybody do it, so I'm not singling out the students whose paper was not graded very high, but I want to see what those students who got a low evaluation on their paper, what did they say about what they learned? And then I'm going to talk to them individually about it. I have this little thing they wrote, and I want to suggest ways, instead of saying, sometimes they'll say, what I learned is, but I already knew, I'm a terrible writer. And I sit down with them and I want to say, but why was this writing unsuccessful? What can you learn from this experience that will make the next paper you write more successful? So I want to help them think through unsuccessful writing experiences so that they can learn from setbacks and learn from disappointment rather than be crushed by it. All right, let's see where we're going to go next. I just think it's really, there's nothing that reduces students' productive persistence faster than a lack of success, a failure on a major assignment early in the semester. So all of us at Community College of Baltimore County try to make all the early writing that we do for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the semester very low stakes, so that any problems that students have aren't crushing. They don't feel like, look, there's no way I'm going to pass this course. So low stakes assignments early in the semester. We also ask students to set some goals. This is a little exercise that I stole from somebody, I think in Michigan. Ask students to write a paragraph describing where they would like to be in 5 years, then list 3 things they need to accomplish this year in order to get where they would like to be in 5 years, and then get into groups of about 3 or 4 and talk about their list of goals. And they're very good at doing that. This has been work. This was not my idea, but I love it. They're very good at sort of critiquing each other's short-term goals and saying, yeah, but that's not enough, or that won't make any difference, and how about this, and so forth. So I have found this. If it was one of you who's in the workshop, in the webinar today, who gave me this, thank you. It's important that students believe that what they're learning has value. That's certainly true in a writing classroom, and I think for those of you who are in a math classroom, this is even more of an issue. Why do we have to learn algebra? I'm sure you've heard that. Even as an English teacher, I've heard that sometimes, and I've certainly heard them say, why am I doing this college thing? And so I show them these data. These don't really surprise them. Just showing this is weekly earnings in 2013, depending on the amount of education that people have. Although I asked them to pick several of these. I think I pick a bachelor's degree, an AA degree, and no degree, and calculate the difference in annual salary. Those are weekly earnings. What would be the difference in annual salary? Because that's much more dramatic. So we just have students do that in class. And then I also show them these data, which are unemployment rates. And that most of my students are not aware of that. They keep hearing about people who get college degrees can't get jobs, but and certainly some can't. People with an AA degree, 5.4% are unemployed, but that's a lot fewer people than people who have a high school diploma or no degree. So I want them to see both those sets of data. I ask students to brainstorm a list of the benefits of college education that are not related to jobs or income. And then we just compare the list from the groups, and sometimes we put them up on newsprint around the room. And I'll just give you a second to read these over. I love the second one, avoid feeling dumb around my husband's parents. All right, so now let's talk about some of those life issues, things going on in their lives. So one of the things that we try to do is create a classroom atmosphere in which students feel comfortable talking about the issues they're experiencing. And I want to talk about this a little bit before I move on from it, because for me, this is one of the most dramatic things I discovered as a teacher for some 30-some years before I started teaching ALP. I was not particularly good at touchy-feely stuff. I was much better at talking about intellectual issues and writing issues and so forth. I was changed. The fact that I was teaching, I was sitting in a classroom with just 10 students. I could no longer be that kind of a teacher. So one of the things, I call it faculty development, is just putting faculty into a classroom with only 10 students changes most faculty. I'm a much different teacher today, even when I'm in a classroom with 20 or 25 students, than I used to be because of the ALP experience. I one time had a student, and in my writing classes, I do a lot of taking sample student papers, taking the names off of them, Xeroxing them up, passing them out to the class, and all discussing if this was your paper, what would you do to improve it on the next draft? We do a lot of that, but I always give my students the option. I say, sometimes you might write about something in a paper that would make you feel uncomfortable if the rest of your classmates were talking about it in class in front of you, even though your name's not on it. And so you can always write, do not reproduce my paper if you don't want me to do that, and I'll be glad to respect that. So this one student, Marie, said to me, or she had written that on the first 3 papers or so in the English 101 class. These were little short papers that but I sometimes reproduce those and we talk about them. And so I called her aside and I said, Marie, you can, that's okay. As I said, I will respect that but if you ever change your mind, I just want to say that in my class, my end of the semester evaluations, very often students say the class where we discussed my paper was the most useful class of the whole semester for me. So I want you to know that. And if you change your mind, Marie said, no, I'm not going to change. I just don't feel comfortable sitting in this class and having my paper discussed. So a week later or so, Marie was also in the co-rec section. And at the end of one of the class meetings of the co-rec section, she came up to me and she said, oh, Professor Adams, when are you going to copy one of my papers? I said, Marie, you told me you didn't want me to do that. And she said, oh, that was in 101. In here, it's fine. And it was sort of like a light bulb going off moment for me, that not only does the small class size change the whole experience for me as a faculty member and turn me into a different kind of a faculty member, but it changes it for students too. When it works, and it doesn't always work. It hasn't worked every semester for me. I've had my bad semesters, but most of the time, something magical happens. And at some point, usually just a few weeks into the semester, all of a sudden, everybody like Marie feels safe in feels they can talk about their papers and feel comfortable doing that, or talk about the difficulties they're having in their marriage, or the difficulties they're having with their children's illnesses, or the difficulty they're having because the bus is always late to get them. They feel it's a much safer environment. And again, I think the model gets a lot of credit for that. But also those of us who are teaching these courses, being aware that that's the atmosphere we want to create helps a great deal. Sometimes these discussions take place with the entire class, and I like that because it means that there are some experts in the room, not me, but other students in the room who wrestled with some of the same problems and have really good advice, much better than I could give them. But other times the students' particular issue is something they would rather discuss one-on-one with me, or maybe I'll suggest they talk to somebody else whom I know has been having a similar problem. I have a little assignment. I ask everybody in the class to write down on a piece of paper one thing they're worried about. It can be anything, one thing you're worried about. It doesn't have to be about this class. It could be about work. It could be about your life, anything you're worried about. I collect them up, and I just use them over the next few class periods whenever I can to bring up the things that they don't put their names on them. I don't know who wrote what. And so they're sort of anonymous. Not sort of, they are anonymous. And so I especially if 2 or 3 people are worried about the same thing or similar things, I bring them up, and I know so that the people who are worried about that issue don't have to personally bring it up. I bring it up in class, and I ask, has anyone else ever dealt with this issue, and so forth. So it's a nice way for kind of unstructured discussion about the kinds of life issues that might be causing students to feel their tenure in college is threatened. I don't know about your schools, but my school has something called an early intervention system. It has to do with Blackboard and computers and data being compiled and letters and emails being sent out to warn students that we've noticed that something is going wrong. The only thing wrong with that system is it's always, in my experience, too late. It isn't early enough. And so one of the things that I think we can do as faculty in co-rec courses is serve as an even earlier intervention system. I think that, we can intervene. If a student misses 2 classes in a row, I'm immediately trying to get hold of that student by phone, by email, by text message, somehow, and intervene quickly. And that seems to me much more effective than waiting for this fancy computer system to work. I'm looking at the clock. I've got 15 minutes, and I think I've got about 30 minutes worth of stuff. So I'm going to go a little faster through a few things here. Lots of times, in an ideal world, when a student comes to me with a problem, I would take that student by the elbow and lead them over to the financial aid office or the office for students with disabilities or wherever I think they could get help with the problem that they come to me with. The only problem is they usually come to me with the problem at the end of class, and I've got another class in 10 minutes, and I can't walk them over to wherever this other place is. I've got to run across campus to my next class. So too often what we do is just tell them, you need to go to the financial aid office. Here's the building, here's the room number, here's the email address, and so forth. And that's pretty much, I always thought, that's all we have time for. And a woman actually in Oklahoma, when I was doing one of these presentations, told me about phone a friend, so I'll tell you all about it. What she suggested is that you pick up your iPhone and you call the financial aid office if that's what they need. And if you know someone there, ask to speak to them and then say, I have this student, Donna here, who needs an emergency loan for a textbook. Hers was stolen and she doesn't have the money to buy, won't have the money to buy a new one for 2 weeks. Can you see her? And Donna says, yeah, when could she come in? And I asked the student and she says, this afternoon. And my friend at Financial Aid says, yes, I have an opening at 2 o'clock. And so I say, thanks a lot to my friend at Financial Aid. And I tell my student, 2 o'clock, you have an appointment with Donna in the Financial Aid office. Now, what I've done is, one, grease the rails a little bit for the student so that she does have an appointment. When she gets there, she won't have to wait for an opening to see somebody or maybe come back another day for an appointment. And secondly, I've created a little bit of obligation on the part of the student to follow up the referral. Too often, our students' lives are so challenging and so stressful that even though there are places they could go and get some help, they don't have time to go there, or they don't go there. And so what I've done is my students saw me put myself on the line for her, and it's going to look bad for me if she doesn't show up in the financial aid office at 2 o'clock. So I've created a little more obligation for her to actually show up for the appointment. Phone a friend. Another thing that we're trying to do to address life issues is a sort of time management issue. Most of the students in ALP at the same time are taking a 1-credit student success course or college experience. We call it student success. Other schools call it college first year experience, something like that. And one of the things most of those courses have students do is fill out an activity log for a week. So they put the day and the time and what they do down all week. And the ones that I like, ask them to rate everything on some scale, 1 to 4. The highest priority things are a 4 and the lowest are a 1 or something like that. And what we do with this is if students aren't in that course, we ask them to fill one of these out for us. But most of them have already just bring their activity log from that course into the ALP class. And we have them sit down and write a little analysis of the week. What things surprise you about how much time they're taking up in a week that are a low priority? What high priority things are not getting as much time as you thought? Where is there time you could use for writing your English paper, for example? So we just have them write a little analysis of this thing that they've done in another course. Here's the questions we ask them about those activity logs. About the end of September, first week of October, I like to ask my students to think about Plan B. I talk about stress. As I say most people find going to college stressful. Some find it very stressful. The most common strategy for dealing with stress that I know is to just bear down harder, work harder, sleep less, and keep grinding away. And it sounds like I'm maybe making fun of that strategy. I actually think that's the most successful strategy there is. That works for many, many students. They're certainly exhausted at the end of the semester, but it's a successful strategy for lots of students. Lots, but not all. Some students grind and grind and grind, and then at some point in the semester, their gears just seize up. They can't deal with the stress any longer, and they drop out of school, they drop their classes, or they just stop coming. Maybe they don't officially withdraw. What I'd like to talk about is if you feel that that point is coming up fairly soon, if you feel you're approaching the point of not being able to handle the stress any longer, let's stop and talk about a plan B. What might you do to keep your gears from seizing up, to relieve the stress in your lives? And I just have students talk, they say wonderful things to each other. Move back in with my parents. That, of course, makes everybody groan and roll their eyes, but some people say that saved my college career. Take in a roommate. Change the hours of my job. Drop a course. I always say a math course, and so forth. So just spending a little time about the end of September thinking about what to do if it all becomes too stressful seems like a useful use of 20 minutes, a half an hour of time in a class. One of the most wonderful things, because a lot of times when I talk about addressing non-cognitive issues, people say to me, oh, but I don't have enough. I have to teach writing, I have to teach reading, I have to teach algebra, I have to teach polynomials, I have all this stuff to cover. I don't have time to. So anytime you can get a twofer, anytime you can do something that's working on math or on, in my case, on writing, and also on non-cognitive issues, that's really a good thing to do. So we have an assignment we've given for years on asking students to do, this is before they start working on doing research in English 101, we call it a little mini research paper, less than a page long, in which they research some topic having to do with personal finances. You can see some examples down at the bottom of the screen. So when they're working, and then we Xerox some of these up and talk about them, but we talk about them both as pieces of writing and how could this piece of writing be organized better, or how could this writer have provided more support for the thesis of the writing and so forth. We talk about them from the point of view of writing, but also from the point of view of personal finance. What about the new Pell Grant rules? Did you learn from this piece of writing or this process of writing your paper? So we're getting a twofer. We're talking both about non-cognitive issues and we're talking about writing issues, in this case, research writing. Finally, let's take a look at the college knowledge issue. One of the things that seems, Rebecca Cox, again, makes this point. Students who need help are the least likely to seek it. And that's been my experience, both as a student and as an instructor. And Rebecca Cox goes on to point out that most students, or many students, especially the ones who are struggling and need help, see us as judgmental, as scary, as that we might reveal their ignorances and so forth. And so they are less likely to come to us for help. So one of the things I suggest to faculty is that you can control, if there's a student in your class that is struggling and hasn't come to see you, even though you have office hours, and you're always encouraging them to come, you can contrive an opportunity for a conversation. So for example, let's take a student named Susie, who is one of these students who's very shy and has never spoken directly to me in class or outside of class, and is struggling. I'll bring a cardboard box full of books to class, and when class ends, I'll say to Susie, are you walking back to the humanities building? Because I need some help carrying this box. Could you walk with me? And we'll just walk along and we just talk. I'm very careful not to talk about English, not to talk about writing. We talk about the weather, talk about the Baltimore Orioles or something. But I want Susie, or all the Susies who are of the kind of student I've been describing, to at least have had the experience of having a conversation with me and finding out I'm not as scary or as judgmental as she might have thought I was. So contriving an opportunity for a conversation seems to me to be a nice strategy that will make it more likely that those students will stay after class to talk to you or come to your office to talk to you. We want students to be aware of the resources available on campus. One of my colleagues does this scavenger hunt. You send them around, you give them a bunch of things. I just listed 4 from her scavenger hunt. They have to find the name of the office, the building it's in, the room number, and the hours it's open for each. And they work in groups on this. And then they produce a document that we Xerox up and give everybody a copy of it. It's a guide to where you can find help on campus. Another possibility is a roster of campus resources. Now, I think of this as more something we could do for faculty development rather than something that we would do for students. But lots of times faculty are not even aware of all the places on campus where their students might get help. And so we make a roster. This is just one page of it. My college has 3 campuses. You see them across the top up there. And then we have topics down the left. And in each column, we have the people on each campus who have some expertise on those kinds of topics. The second page gives everybody in alphabetical order, gives their office number, their phone number, and their email address. So every faculty member has all of these resources from the get-go in the semester and can use those to give them students advice, or use these to do phone a friend, to call. Looking at the first one on the list, Bill Sigmon. I don't even know who he is. He's over on the Catonsville campus for academic advice for students. Another way to help students, I think lots of times our vocabulary in higher ed throws students off. I made a list of terms that over the years I've felt some of my students didn't have any idea what they mean. And I actually have a group activity. Each group gets 4 or 5 of these and has to write a 1-paragraph explanation of what a syllabus is, what withdrawal means, who the bursar is, and so forth. And once again, then they present them and we compile them and make a handout for the whole class. So it's an exercise in just getting to know college terminology. So that I managed to do. I did. Now I went too fast. I'm 5 minutes early, but maybe Jenny, you have some questions for me? I do want to say, if you have questions that we don't get a chance to answer, I put my email, my website, and my Twitter handle on the bottom of the screen, and I'd love to hear from some of you in the next few days if you have questions. But do we have any questions, Jenny?
This would be a good time if you have a question to type it in. I will, while you are formulating your question, I will say that yes, we will make the slides available from all of these presentations as well as the recorded webinars. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, you should see those available on our website at mcca.org. Because Peter just gave a whole lot of really good classroom presentations, and I know that ideas for classroom activities and presentations that I know that many of you will want to share with colleagues who maybe were not able to be on the line. If you have questions for Peter, you can type them or you can raise your hand at this time, and I'll unmute you. All right, I'm not seeing anything right now.
Well, let me add a little something then.
Sure.
People are, I hope, coming up with some questions. And what I'd like to add is this, that what I just presented is very much a work in progress. Notice there wasn't a whole lot of big theoretical framework to it. It's just a lot of concrete ideas that I've accumulated both through my own experience, but mainly from stealing them from other people. And whether you liked any of those, if you liked any of them, you're welcome to steal them from me. But I just encourage you to just, I know all of your lives are terribly busy, and I know that now that I'm a retired person, I have trouble remembering how hard it was to teach 15 hours a semester. But I'm still suggesting that you take on a responsibility to think of some of these on your own, to think of things. And if you do, and you want to email them to me, I promise you I will steal them in later. In fact, I think I see that Charlotte Finnegan is in the group, and I think one of the ideas I presented today I actually stole from Charlotte. But I urge you.
We all steal from Charlotte.
I urge you all, even if nothing I presented seemed particularly like it would work in your environment, that the kind of thinking that people did when they came up with these things is the kind of thinking that I'm encouraging you all to do. And then the second thing I would say is that I started this all off by pointing out that hardly any of us who are teaching in co-rec classrooms in English or in math have had any formal preparation for addressing non-cognitive issues. I didn't even know what the term meant 7 or 8 years ago when we first started ALP. So that it is really important for those of you who might have an opportunity on your campuses to do this, to organize faculty development around these kinds of issues, because very often you don't need me, you don't need a form. Faculty just talking to each other can come up with ideas about what worked and what worked better here and why that didn't work, so forth. And so I think we used to have a session that we called, remember the name of our program is ALP, ALP. We called it Apples and Oranges, and it was hard to pronounce but kind of cute. And we just had a session once a month on each campus in which people came together. There was no agenda. Nobody presented anything. People came in and they talked. We said, you can talk about your successes, you can talk about your failures, or you can ask questions of other people about how do you handle X or Y or Z. Those are the sort of 3 organizing principles. And they were wonderful sessions, and people just sharing ideas with each other. And in the non-cognitive area is a big opportunity for that kind of sharing.
Charlotte says she's flattered and thinks that the idea originally came from Peter anyway.
Well, there's nothing like stealing something from a thief.
That's right. Well, I don't see any other questions at this time, and so I think we'll go ahead and close this webinar.
Well, thank you all for coming, and congratulations again on all the progress that you guys are making in the state of Michigan. I'm really proud of you.
And thank you, Peter, for being with us today. We really appreciate your insights and what you've shared. So I'm going to take back control and end the broadcast. And we will see you all back in about 15 minutes to hear from John Hetz. Thank you.